So this is my review week project where I implemented an electronic medical record with Neo4j, which is a graph database. So why Neo4j? I had been hearing people throw the name around a lot, and I had heard it was a graph database, which I knew was great for really interconnected data. And since I want to get a job in the healthcare technology sector where there's tons of interconnected data, I figured it would be a really great technology to learn and something great on my resume. So what is a graph database? So you can compare it with a relational database like SQL, where data is stored in tabular form in tables, and you need to do joins and store a separate table if the data is interconnected. And as your data becomes more and more interconnected, you can imagine you'd have to do more joins, and it becomes really computationally expensive as your queries get more and more complex. This contrasts with a graph database where your nodes are stored directly next to each other if they have a relationship, and you can also store data on this edge that connects the node. They're super flexible. They're said to be whiteboard friendly, which is like a buzzword, meaning you kind of draw this model on the whiteboard and then you can directly translate it right into your database. So it's a really powerful technology for really complex and interconnected data. So Neo4j is an implementation of a graph database that's written in Java, and it's supported in a number of different languages, and it has many different integrations. For example, there's a GraphQL integration if you want easier API usage. There's a lot of different use cases. You can use it for social network modeling. You can use it to implement a recommendation engine, and it's used in all different types of industries. Some big companies use it, eBay, Walmart. So now that I kind of knew that I wanted to use Neo4j, I had to come up with a project, and I figured what better industry where there's interconnected data than healthcare. So I decided that I wanted to implement a kind of rudimentary electronic medical record. So here is the initial model that I was working with. You can see that a patient has different problems. Those problems are treated by different medication classes, and those medication classes have different medications in them. We can also show that a patient takes a certain medication. They can also be allergic to a medication class, and medication classes can also interact with each other. And I wanted to be able to show, once the user had put all of their data in, whether they were taking any medications that might cause an allergic reaction or any medications that might cause an interaction. So the first thing that I did was go to the Neo4j browser, which is kind of like the PG admin for Postico of Neo4j, and I started working with Cypher queries. So Cypher is the native query language that Neo4j uses. There's also another graph query language called Gremlin, which is a little bit more explicit in terms of how you can do your graph traversals. So it's better if you're doing really, really complex queries. So we can do something like create a patient name Finn, and you can see that we added that node, and now we can do something like match and we can run that, and I forgot to put the arrow in there. Run that query, and you can see that we created this relationship. Finn has hypertension, unfortunately, but you can see that that can get really tedious after a while to write those queries. So I started to work on an app so that way I could do it easily and with an API. So a lot of time initially was just spent making those initial CRUD kind of operations for each of the different entities, my problems, my patients, my meds, and my med classes. So here you can see we have a query to fetch all of the patients, and here we have a query to fetch a specific patient. It's obviously a lot more complex. I'm getting more information. And here is a query to delete a patient. So once I got all that kind of up and running, as well as editing and reading the different entities in the model, I was able to start working on some relationships. At first, I was writing a different relationship for every single, or a different route for every single relationship. Like I had a route for making an allergy, a route for making a medication interaction. And then I realized it'd be a lot easier if I just wrote a really dynamic route using router params that could handle any kind of relationship that I wanted, and I would just send the relationship type in the body of the request. So I implemented that, and it really dried up my code a lot. You can see here I'm validating, making sure that we're only having things in the API router params that we can use in our database, and then here we are actually creating the relationship. So once I was able to create relationships, that's when things started to get fun, and that's when it became really apparent how useful the graph database was. Now I could start implementing those warnings, like I wanted to warn patients if they were taking a medication that could cause an allergy, and the queries to do that were really easy. So you can see here, this is the query to find if a patient has a certain interaction. We're basically just looking if a patient takes a medication that causes an interaction with another medication that a patient takes. And then we return that, and we're able to show a warning in the front end using that. And the last thing that I wanted to do in my app was do authentication and authorization. Like, for example, I wanted administrators to be able to edit different information, like what problems are available for you to choose from, and what kind of medication interactions there are, and what medications belong to what classes, but they shouldn't be able to see any kind of patient information. And providers should be able to see patient information, but they shouldn't be able to edit any of those drug interactions or indications for certain drugs or anything like that. And then patients should really be only able to see their chart and shouldn't be able to edit a lot. So I had to write some routes to create those different roles, and then I created the authorization. You can see here some of the backend authorization. Like here, we're making sure that the patient is a provider, or sorry, that the user is a provider with this middleware function before we get all the patient information. Here we're making sure that the user is a patient, the correct patient, or is a provider before we send them this specific patient information. And then I also implemented authorization on the front end as well. So here you can see we're not actually fetching any patient information unless we know that it's a user or is a provider or it's the correct patient. And here we're not actually rendering any of this component unless they have the correct authorization. So now we can do a little demo. Let me log out. I'm going to log in as an administrator first. Cool, and you can see that this is my profile, and you're logged in as admin. And we can see the providers, you can see a list of admins if you're an administrator, and then we can see all the different information. So let's add a few things. Let's add problem. And you can see that we can edit the problem, we can delete it, add it back. And we can add a medication class. And we can add a medication. And then we can add different associations. And we can add an interaction. Cool. All right, and now let's log in, or let's actually sign up, and we'll create a different provider. Cool, and we can, the provider has access to the patients. Let's go to someone, Jane Doe. Let's see. So you can see that this patient has some warnings. None of the patient's medications address this problem. And then this says medication not treating any problem in the problem list. We can add some other problems. Let's add schizophrenia and pneumonia, and we'll add azithromycin. We can see that Warning for pneumonia went away because we added azithromycin. And then we can add risperidone, and we'll see that warning for schizophrenia went away because risperidone treats that. But now we have an interaction between azithromycin and risperidone. We can also add some allergies. And now we have another warning possible allergic reaction. So that's pretty much all the functionality. Oh, you can also, let me just log in as a patient. And you can see we can't really edit anything. So where do I go from here? Next steps. There's a lot of different analytics that I can implement, like epidemiology, that would be interesting to display. So, for example, for a given problem, I can rank the frequency of comorbid problems in the patient population. Here's a Cypher query that could do that. Maybe an insurance company would want to know ranking of providers by the number of their patients taking unnecessary medications. And here's the Cypher query where I can do that. So it becomes really easy to do these complex queries with a graph database. I can also extend my model. I can, maybe certain drug classes are synergistic with each other. Maybe certain drug classes cause side effects that exacerbate, certain conditions the patient has. I can add more information on the edges. Maybe here I want some more information about what kind of diagnostic criteria were met, maybe the status of the disease. I can add more information on the nodes themselves. Maybe I want some more, educational information about clinical findings that are associated with asthma. And we can also put some of those analytics that I was talking about. We can also start to extend the model. Like maybe we want to add a provider and a relationship with a patient. Maybe we want to add an insurance company. Maybe we want to add an encounter, like an office visit. And here we could include progress notes. And we can also put a copay that the insurance had to pay for this encounter. Then we can put a prescription, and that would relate to a different drug and different problems, and would also relate to the, basically relate to everything. So you can see that things start to get really complicated, and you can kind of run with this. But that's kind of the beauty of it, is that it's really flexible, and you can kind of add these things as you go. And it's a really powerful technology that hopefully I'll get to use in my job one day.